No drinking on the job.
It's imported from Iceland. Brought the bottle all the way back from Iceland.
Ja, да. Very bra.
Do you speak Russian, Phil?
Да, по-русски говорю и тоже, вы знаете, я знак lite grann på norsk och förstår Islandi, den andra språket. I speak some Norwegian. I was married to a Norwegian.
Right.
So.
Yes.
Russian, French, Spanish, Italian, German.
I was hearing you in the elevator with the guy.
Yeah, that's right. Don't shout, he can't hear you. Don't hear, he can't shout you. That's right. Ni кричать, вам слышит.
Because of my knowledge of useless information, the joke of I need a dime, here is one of the pages of my novel, is lost on countless people.
Yeah, because they don't know about.
Who knows about dime novels? Yeah, so.
Well, that's because history of popular culture is obviously not being transferred beyond, let's say, around 1987. I think beyond that, I think the ignorance lies deep out there about American popular culture and who started it and when.
Yes, and there's so much to know that, so it's difficult to transmit all that stuff.
Well, unfortunately, the dime was in Mr. Rococo's pocket.
Yes. What?
Are we happening, Kathy? Is everybody there?
Is everybody there?
Oh, I guess we're on.
Yep, we're ready to go. So we
Thank you.
Yep,
Perfect.
all set.
Okay, I can't see the other people there, but let us begin. So it is December 2nd, 2020. I am Robert Berend, and I am having this interview with Phil Proctor and David Ossman of Firesign Theatre. Hi, David. For an hour, a little bit over an hour perhaps, and through a class that I'm teaching now for the Tufts Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, Tufts OLLI, here in the Boston area. So I've been a fan of Firesign Theatre. I grew up in Los Angeles, and at about age 12, Firesign Theatre was on KPFK and KPCC and KRLA. Did I miss one? KMET? Yeah. And so as a 12-year-old, this was 1968, so the Watts riots had happened in 65. In 68, there was the Chicago demonstration. Martin Luther King was assassinated, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, and I was a kid in junior high, but for some good twist of fate, I was listening to underground FM radio and Jimi Hendrix, and listening to, on Sunday morning, the four guys of the Firesign Theatre, riff off of reading the Sunday comics and the TV guide. And now it is some number of years later in 2020, and I'm teaching a class which I started, and through a mutual friend, I've reached out to David Ossman and Phil Proctor, the surviving members. And today we will have an interview, and after a while we will break out for some Q&A. And let me introduce the two gentlemen. David Ossman, well, obviously they've all been with the Firesign Theatre since day one at KPFK Radio in Los Angeles. David Ossman has been been involved with theater, involved with NPR's 100th anniversary of The Wizard of Oz, the NPR War of the World's 50th anniversary. He's been writing poetry. Phil Proctor, Phil, I saw you in a play near Crescent Heights in Santa Monica 15, 20 years ago. No doubt one of dozens and dozens of theater things you have done. Both have done voiceovers in movies. And missing, unfortunately, is the late Peter Bergman, sometimes known as Baldy, who passed away in 2012. And Phil Austin, who back in the original days was producing radio at KPFK, and Peter Bergman was at KPFK and knew Phil and Phil Proctor, and that's how some of the genesis of this. And David, I think you were at KPFK working with Phil Austin, is that right?
It's a complicated story, and you're sort of halfway there. I had been at KPFK for about 5 years before Peter showed up at a fundraiser. By that time, I was raising funds, but I was working at ABC television. Peter came in and tore the station apart, immediately he was just an amazing on-the-air presence, immediately got a radio show called Radio Free Oz, which he shared with some other people for a while, but he was just the dominant personality. And it was the first underground call-in show in Los Angeles, and KPFK had a pretty good reach by that time. And it was on that show that he gained this tremendous young audience that Columbia Records, a producer called him and said, "Hey, would you like to make an astrology album?" And he said, "No, but I have this comedy group." Well, the comedy group Phil Proctor was, as he could tell you, in New York doing a show. I was working for ABC, or maybe I had by that time turned on and dropped out and tuned in. And Phil Austin was virtually a young kid. He was 25, and he was just, a young actor in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So that was Peter's group that came together to write the album that you've just played, Waiting for the Electrician. We didn't know each other. We had done, although we knew each other, we had never really done any serious creative work together, just improv, really. And so it was a miracle that the four of us sat in Peter Bergman's living room in Nichols Canyon and put together the 5 pieces, or 4 pieces, I guess, that are on that album. Do you remember any of it, Phil? I'm trying to.
Was I there?
I think so.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's pretty much it. I was involved in the Sunset Strip curfew riots with Peter Fonda and my friend Brandon DeWilde.
You can elaborate on that, because that's where the Buffalo Springfield song "For What It's Worth" came about. Because Stephen Stills, last year I taught a course on Woodstock.
Happening here, what it is, and exactly. It's a man with a gun over there. Well, at one point we sat down in front of Pandora's box. We would not be moved. Peter was there because he was researching a little movie that he made later called Easy Rider. Okay. And Brandon and I were there because we were friends of Peter's and, wanted to be in on the action. And I sat down on an open issue of the Free Press. I sat on Peter Bergman's face. It was a picture of Peter Bergman, and it said, "KPFK newsman Peter Bergman interviews returning Vietnam War veterans." So the next day, I called KPFK, and there was Peter, whom I'd known at Yale. He wrote the lyrics for 2 musicals that I starred in the Dramat at Yale, and we connected, and he said, "I'm the Wizard of Oz, and I have this show, Radio Free Oz. Why don't you come down and play?" And I said, "Sure." So, I was an actor at that point. I'd been in LA before with a play, musical comedy called The Amorous Flea that I won a Theater World Award for. And I went back to do a Broadway show, Time for Singing. And then I understudied Brandon DeWilde in a show, and we became close friends. So I was an actor. I was a working actor. I did a soap opera called The Edge of Night, playing a juvenile delinquent, of course. And at this point, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do in Los Angeles. I was, look for theater work, I guess, and television work and all movie work, whatever. It was all happening there. And instead, I went to KPFK that evening, and I met these 2 other guys, David and Phil. And we discovered, I don't know, maybe it was Peter who asked us, we were all fire signs. I'm a Leo, David's a Sagittarian, Peter's a Sagittarian, and Phil is an Aries. So we immediately got labeled as the Oz Firesign Theatre. I went back to New York after this initial meeting where we all found that we really could work together. We're like a bunch of musicians that could just kind of jam together. And Peter was the perfect twisted straight man, because whatever crazy thing we came up with, he would take it as, this is a real person talking about a real thing. And it was all total surrealistic nonsense, most of it. So we all loved old time radio. We loved the English goon shows, which were totally absurdist comedy. And we found that we had in common that we'd all acted. Peter, not so much. Peter had the gift of gab and an incredible intellect. But he was a scamp. He was a prankster. Okay. And he loved putting people on.
A merry
And that-
prankster.
Yeah, and that's where we all came together because we were doing basically put-ons. We were pretending to be real people, and his audience went right with it. Just absolutely bought right into it, and so we knew we had something going. I went back to New York really to sublet my apartment on West 11th Street in the Village, and I was living with a girl named Diana Dew, who had invented electric clothing. Please, let's not get into that. And at a certain point, the affair was over. And I was having a conversation with her about, it's been great, and I got to go to LA. And the phone rang, and it was Peter Bergman. And Peter Bergman said, we're going to do our first record. Now we're coming around to what David was saying. We said, we're going to do our first record. We're calling it Waiting for the Electrician or Someone Like Him, based on a skit that we did in the UCLA Student Lounge. And he said, there's a ticket waiting for you at Rockefeller Plaza or wherever it was at Columbia Records. Come on back and we'll write it. Okay. So the fate interceded. It was like, this is my destiny. And indeed, I went and got the ticket, flew to LA. And as David pointed out, we met at Peter's place and we started writing. And that was when we kind of discovered that we could also write together. And that was really the great joy that kept us together for 50 years. The fact that we could write together, and then we were given opportunities, platforms to perform the writing that we had created, and especially the chance to do records. We were signed to I think a 4-record contract with Columbia. And in those days, if you put a record out, it was, a comedy record, especially one that's like 20 minutes long, because we invented the long form comedy record, as an homage to radio in a way. People would buy it and take it home and listen to it. So you didn't have to be PC. You could do, if it worked, if it caught on, that was a real audience. I always think that we started on a listener-supported station, and then we became a listener-supported group, right? Because the people would buy our record, and we didn't get a lot of airplay or anything. You can't play 20-minute cut on the air. And we did, some short pieces in the first record, but even they were not, they were long short pieces, and we weren't going to get any radio play. It wasn't until the advent of FM radio, and I'm going to let David talk a little bit more about this, that we started getting airplay, because college stations, students could play a half an hour, a 20-minute cut because it was non-commercial.
Did you two do the aliens must register their forms?
Oh,
Aliens register now. Yeah.
Yes. Register
Remember
now.
that, David?
Yeah, that was looking for the short form, just to pick up from where Phil is saying. We were looking for radio play, and we put out a single, and the single had that piece along with 2 others called Station Break, which the idea was that one of these freeform, now really loose radio stations, that we were friends with all the DJs. They loved us. They loved getting our new albums when they came out, and they learned how to play them. But the point of Station Break was that we could, here was a 1 minute, a minute and a half that you could drop in, and nobody would. It was the Free Mexican Air Force. I mean, it was way out there, And then the other side was kind of a little history of old time radio, a sketch piece really that just allowed us to do some funny voices and funny sound effects. And that was the first. That was produced by Jimmy Guercio. Who was Chicago, among many other things. And Jimmy brought into the studio, I remember this so well, just wrote about it. He brought condenser microphones into the studios. They were the first ones, and we never could use them. We hunted around. Finally, Phil actually opened the cabinet that had the 1940s old RCA perfect vocal microphones, and we pulled those out. And actually, the first album probably has a mix of microphones. But when we did Nick Danger, they were the original Nick Danger microphones. It was super. Yeah.
Yeah, Forward into the Past was the name of our collection of imaginary old time radio shows. You know, the quiz show and the detective show and the police state, where policemen, it's policemen will become, all kinds of funny little records.
Help, it's the police, I think was the
Help, it's the police. That's right.
If we have 10 hours, maybe we'll talk about your movie Zachariah. But I have a whole bunch of other questions.
Okay,
one
address
is,
those questions. We'll try to answer shortly and quickly.
Before we leave this aspect of history,
sure,
Jimmy Guercio brought into the studio a live musical group to supply music to our first album. And it was the Wrecking Crew. And Glenn Campbell was on the guitar.
Wow.
You know, we didn't know any of this. We were part of history and apart from it, you know. And being with Columbia Records, which was the beginning of the recording industry, the success of the recording industry, all of the great artists were there. Dylan was there, you know. And when we played some conventions for Columbia and rubbed shoulders with all these terrific people. The Dolby, remember, we met Dolby, who created the Dolby sound system. And
that studio you're talking about, Phil, had the first Dolbys ever used.
That's right.
We were at 8 tracks, and they were really noisy. The 6 that we weren't using, they were hissy. And so our engineer said, "Wait a minute, I'll be right back." And he rolled in this big multi-story piece of equipment, which was the first Dolby, plugged it in, and that hiss was gone. It was great.
By the way, the studios that we were working in, which David hinted at, were old-time radio studios at Columbia Square. Okay, so we were actually doing our recording, our parodies of radio and all of that in real, authentic radio studios.
Nick
Danger's organ is a B3 that was sitting in that studio that had been used in Suspense.
That's right. That's right. Suspense, for those who don't know, Suspense was one of the most famous mystery shows on old time radio.
I'm a fan of the Hammond B3. So a question for David. I can flip a coin, but for David. So one of the questions is, how do you know when a work is done? How did you know, like, okay, we have Nick Danger in the can, or the elevator skit, like is the elevator boy in your family, or the other million things on the 25 or so albums? When do you know it's done?
When we are all laughing at the same time at it. When the playback comes and we all listen to it and say, "Yep, that's got it, that's got it." And believe me, we used to cut tape at the very beginning. On Electrician, there's tape editing, and there's less on the next album, and there's almost none on Dwarf because it was 16 track, which means you have to slice it at about a 90 degree, it's terrible. Very hard on our engineers. So we decided that we would just roll back. If we didn't like a take, we would roll the tape back and redo the scene. So literally, it was when we all sat down, listened to the playback, and said, "That's got it. Okay, let's move on."
Yeah,
that's what Nixon did. Nixon did that also.
Like musicians, and we also. It's funny because David brings up the fact that when we started, we had 4-track tape, which is about that big, and then it got to be 16 track, and then by the end of a certain period of time, there were these huge reels. Remember, David, of tape with maybe 100 tracks on them, big reels. It's like we were all getting smaller and smaller, and then it all went away. Everything became digital, and the studio became just a little box that you could carry around, and record into. So we actually had the advantage of working with all the new technologies and using them to our advantage.
It was really one of the miracles that happened to us in terms of time and place was that at the moment we were at Columbia Records, they would hire anybody who had a name in hopes that they would be a famous band.
That's right.
So the Firesign Theatre meant only, are they going to sell records? They didn't know what we were going to do. Okay, that's first. Columbia is a huge company. That's second. We were very lucky. to have that. And contrary to what Phil said, that first contract was only a 1-year contract.
Is that right? Oh, okay.
For the first album.
It was because of the guy named John McClure that we got another.
John McClure, an executive there, liked Electrician so much, and it had gotten so much quote underground play, although there wasn't a lot of that in '66. It had gotten played on in New York City all night. Side one, then it was who is it, that guy who does the all night show, that wonderful guy who does the all night show.
The documentary about that guy on WBAI.
Yeah, the BAI. They played it all night. Millions of people heard it. How did we know?
I have a few dozen other questions, not to mention the people waiting in the wings.
Yeah.
What is funny? Oh, just one second, let me backtrack because I have 1,000 thoughts. So I want to say that when you were inducted by the Library of Congress, they referred to you as the Beatles of comedy. So I did want to know which one of you was John, but we can get to that one later. So what is funny?
Harpo, I think, is.
Yeah, I just saw a Marx Brothers movie last night called At the Circus, which I'd never seen before. And the parallel with that, with us, to find what was funny, we had another great opportunity. There was a club called the Ash Grove, which for decades now has been the Improv, the famous Improv, where we also perform. But we used to try out our material like the Marx Brothers used to do up in the Libero Theater in Santa Barbara until they'd perfected their routines to film, okay? And so we tried out a lot of our material on an audience to find out what they thought was funny. And even though we kind of we always wanted to break one another up. We always wanted, to have the freedom to be able to improvise off of the material that we were crafting because we were trying stuff out. And then when we had something that we believed in, we could write it down and take it into the studio because we had a contract, thanks to John McClure, that gave us unlimited studio time, although it was always late at night, which is fine. Unlimited studio time in exchange for a reduced royalty. But I don't believe in royalty anyway.
Realist,
I'm an anti-royalist, yes.
Yeah, it was a the other aspect of that is that the technology was changing for us and making it more possible for us to make richer, deeper, more complicated LPs, because the LP I always considered to be an art form, a storytelling form, a wonderful shape, 12 by 12. Now you have a Dope Humor of the 70s, which is this new double LP.
Tell us about the new.
Hold it up, and when you open it up,
I'm holding it up right now. Let's see if it cut to me. There I am.
Hope I remember to buy it.
Phil. It's 24 by 12. It's a great shape. It's a great size. So,
is it open up so you can clean your weed on it?
Let's see. Well, it's got that thing down the middle. Sure, you sweep it into the middle, and all the seeds go down the center.
Right.
Right. Oh my God, that's a memory, isn't it?
If only we could remember. Yeah,
there it is.
About your
oh man, when we did Nick Danger Third Eye, he was sponsored by a marijuana Fantastic Cigarettes.
Long in the leaf, short in the can.
Long in the leaf, short in the can.
In the event either of you
how long it took for that to finally happen. Oh my goodness.
You're invited to drop in a voice from the past, David and Phil. If you just feel like a Catherwood or a somebody, do feel free. So from David, I was asked to pick, and so David, could you please give a 60-second summary of the showing X-rated movies at KPFK radio and the outrage? But keep it short because there's plenty more to go through. So
that connects immediately with the story. That connects with the story that Phil was telling about the four of us showing up at the station. Peter saying, "You're we're going to do a film festival." We said, "Okay." He said, "You're all going to play different directors." We said, "Okay," which meant everybody was going to do two voices. Peter was going to be the host, and we were all going to play. That would make 6 other people. So we were the 6 other movie directors. And we each had a visible weirdness. I personally was from Latin America, and my thing was to push large cameras down hills because I really liked the kinetic speed and the whole psychedelic thing when it happened. It was Mario Estonatl was his name, as I remember. So we all had these, but to cut to the chase, Austin, who like carried a sword cane, was very strange English filmmaker who made movies like Blondie Pays the Rent, and Ants and Tangerines, I think was another
Right.
one.
Ants and Tangerines.
Anyway, he showed Peter. We were all showing little clips of our movies, and he showed his, and it's silent, and we were watching it, and oh well,
On the radio, just so people
and then we're watching it over the radio. This is not television.
It was
So
called Blondie
Peter-
Pays the Rent. It was
Blondie Pays the Rent, and so Peter
move
says
to the
this is an obscene movie. And
Yeah.
this is a scene, we cannot show this, and he shuts it down. He shuts the movie down. Well, there was no movie, and it wasn't really showing, except everybody who was listening to the radio believed that it was. And the extremos immediately got on the phone and said, how can you censor this movie? At that point, we knew we had them.
That's it.
We won. That talk about winning the battle. That was the war. We knew that if we did this right, and did it with serious intent, that we could make theater out of what it was that we were doing. And we were all in theater, wanted to do theater at that time as much as we might have wanted to make a movie, But that was it. That was the Oz Film Festival, when everybody believed that we had terminated a dirty movie over the radio. Crazy.
Superb. Thank you. I have a couple of questions I'll integrate. Were there ever any censorship issues? And, well, okay, not unrelated, but clean humor. I just finished taking a class on humor and censorship. And you might be aware that like Chris Rock and Seinfeld in the last couple of years have said they're not going to play at colleges because there's far too much censorship. You have to sign a release that it won't be homophobic or sexist or Islamophobic or bash this or bash that. And they have more than enough money. They don't have to tour at colleges. But in thinking about this the last few weeks because of that class, your stuff was always clean, except once on Dear Friends, when you're talking about your girlfriend, like get into that later, get into her later. And that's the only thing.
It's not exactly.
Violet Dudley's underwear that I can remember.
May I answer you? Please. And then David can add to it. There was no such thing as PC, political correctness. It was just like perfect comedy. And again, we were making records for private listening at home. So we got away with a lot of stuff. We used some obscenity comedically if we had to. From the point of view of somebody who was rude. We did a thing called the American Pageant on our second album, How Can You Be in Two Places at Once When You're Not Anywhere at All, also known as the Marx-Lenin album, Groucho Marx and John Lennon. And it is incredibly politically incorrect, because what we did was we constructed a song that represented all of the minorities that created the diversity of America, but they were all called by their derogatory names. Okay, and that was the joke. It
was the policeman who sang the song.
Yeah, we were diffusing it. We were refusing to say that anybody was any better than anybody else, and everybody was calling the other race in some rude, stupid way. But you can't play that. We couldn't play that on the air now. It would be. I think it'd be totally.
Here's the odd thing. That at that time you couldn't play, a cocaine song, give me riding the train, snorting cocaine, whatever that, you couldn't play any of those marijuana songs. None of that you could play on the radio. Now you can't play any of the things that we used to do on the radio,
On the radio.
on the radio. So isn't that weird? The yes, no answer question, answer to your question is no, we never had any censorship from anybody at Columbia Records at any time, nor do I think, did they censor anybody's music? Why would they have? You know, it wasn't in their best interest to do that. We had grown up on radio, and we knew that we did not say the 4-letter words, because why would we want to get in trouble doing that when we could go around it and do everything else that we wanted to do without that? That would have been stupid of us to do that. As a stand-up routine about radio and about its you know, the difficulties with radio. If you got your cat, I just lost mine here.
Intently,
Yeah.
This is
Yeah,
Pepper.
she's there.
I'm getting bored now. Okay.
Yeah. They don't care for this kind of thing. But there was no censorship. No, we did exactly what we wanted to, wrote what we wanted to, were as outrageous as we could. And Phil is exactly right. This was home entertainment. If you wanted to play it on your radio station, that was your problem. And indeed, they learned how to play dwarf because they needle dropped it just right at the beginning of Porgy and Moneyhead, and they picked it up right after What Is Reality, and they were cool. You know, they had that scene, and jocks learned to do that, learned how to play that. The Dear Friends album, which was an album of short cuts from our radio shows, exactly like Hold the Record Up Again, Phil.
Yeah, okay.
The Dear Friends album was to help us get radio play. Our radio shows were an hour long or even 2 hours long. And so we would clip them down to 3 minutes, improv, written pieces, whatever. Anyway, that album got us airplay. I don't know whether this album will get us airplay or not. It's a great insert with a Phil Proctor collage there on the back. Yes, indeed.
And Taylor Jessen, our archivist, really produced this record. David produced the Dear Friends album, which is, you know, cuts of which are represented on this. And this is our radio career. This was the other career. We started on the radio, then we became recording artists, and we attained some celebrity because of that, which allowed us to tour and do all kinds of fun rock band stuff. But basically, we kept our chops alive on the radio. And our radio years were like 70 to 73, something like that. And we were on a whole bunch of stations. And what David was referring to was the Firesign Theatre Hour, which was a 2-hour show. We had cooperation from a zany engineer named Earl Jive, the real Earl Jive, who used to drop in music and sound effects on us unexpectedly, just like an improvisation that we would have to respond to. And that'd take us in different directions. So this album, Dope Humor of the 70s, we're the dopes, but the humor has a lot to do with the fact that we sat around a table together with material to try out on one another and improvised off of the reality, actuality of the culture that we were parodying.
So on the topic of your upcoming album, I have a question. What's the significance of expressing or seeing reality through the psychedelic lens? I can only imagine that you were reasonably high doing this stuff because it was the 60s. No, were you sober and clean?
You want to answer that?
Yeah, you answer it, David.
Yeah, I don't think any of us were big, as it were, acid heads. I certainly wasn't. We all smoked pot. Everybody smoked pot. That was the common license of the youth community. That was the signal. That was the hand bump. That was
social glue. Yes,
that was the social glue. And we began in our performance career because once we were a band, then like bands, we had to go and perform. And so that's why we ended up at the Ash Grove doing half-hour comedy plays. Who did that? Nobody did that before or afterward. Proctor and Bergman did half of the Firesign.
Half the wits, the Firesign Theatre. David's right. But we also we did a show at a place called the Magic Mushroom, which was a club, and we were part. It was like an early Prairie Home Companion. It was a psychedelic Prairie Home Companion.
Steve
Okay?
Martin as another opening act.
Steve Martin was an opening act for the Firesign Theatre.
And you opened for, you opened for Buffalo Springfield at the Santa Monica Civic.
Yes, we did. I mean, we were
That's right.
a rock and roll band without music, you know, and that was at the Ice House in Pasadena that Steve did his first stand-up act, and I think it was our first performance, wasn't it, Dave?
It was our first. I don't know whether it was his absolutely first, but it was really close. And we were. It was he went the direction of his stand-up act and parlayed that into great characters in movies, you know, which was that was his strength.
But
We
his act
stuck
was,
together.
his act, like ours, was surreal. I mean,
Yes, absolutely.
And,
Well, I think everybody who came along at that time was basically doing some kind of surreal act. You asked what Marx Brothers we were. I think we were closer to W.C. Fields than any of the Marx Brothers, really.
True.
Because he was so far out there. And Lord Buckley and the people who were just beyond the pale with their senses of humor.
I'd like to get back to your psychedelic question, because I did drop acid, and I found it fascinating. I learned, you know, something from it, and here's my theory about it. And David knows this. I've talked about it before. I believe that what we were doing was psychedelic in the sense that we were using associative thinking. Okay, we could go from point A to point Z simply by using a certain number of words, a certain connection. We didn't have to explain it. You know, the classic example is "Don't crush that dwarf, hand me the pliers." We basically invented channel surfing. Click, 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 click. So we go from one show to another show, and it could be anything. And I always felt that the albums were kind of exercise for the brain, because you know you kind of surrendered to the flow of what was going to be happening without having to have a logical feeling of a plot or anything like that. In Nick Danger, it's the closest thing to having a plotted album, because we were parodying a certain kind of detective story, and that's one of the reasons why that helped us in our success, because people who couldn't get into this psychedelic stream of flow of things, they could latch on to the idea, oh, it's a funny detective parody. And that opened, you know, the other aspects of Firesign too.
And Tiny Dr. Tim and the Keeper of the Sacred Tablets on the first album.
The first album.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's from the Middle Cut, which was a total take, our own personal take on the people who were buying our records and listening to us on the radio. I mean, it just totally sent up the whole psychedelic movement. It wasn't until years later I met Tiny Dr. Tim, and he said, "Oh yeah, I knew about you guys."
Yeah, right.
No, I knew about you guys.
We were known as the jesters of the rock generation, right, Dave? Because we were.
Yeah, we were
like.
Yeah.
Is levity, and people were taking the youth movement so seriously. Nothing wrong with that. You know, we were trying to get the old white-haired men out of power. How did that work?
The orange-haired guys.
It was revolutionary. 33 and a third revolutions a minute.
Phil, you just said the opposite of comedy is
gravity. Gravity is levity.
It's gravity, yes. In the back of my mind, and so maybe it's you, and where is it? Because I know the quote, but it's decades old. The opposite of comedy is gravity. I've said that for decades. What's the source? What's my footnote?
I think George Tirebiter said that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was George. I think it was George who said that.
George Tirebiter.
Roger Steffens is here. If you have any voices for posterity and posteriority, please feel free to drop.
You stupid fool! You're asking for trouble. You know that, don't you? Rocky Rococo is going to get you. Look out!
And
yes, well, that's certainly Rocky. That certainly is Rocky. Well, George is going to be 100.
Wow.
In a week, on the 7th, George Tirebiter will be 100. He's born in 1920. A great year. Mickey Rooney was born that year, and one of my favorites. And Ray Bradbury was born in 1920 as well, and I think they've both been real inspirations. And so George will be celebrating his 100th birthday, so he doesn't make a lot of appearances nowadays because he's
But David, you do his voice so you can appear for you.
Oh, well,
right?
that. In that case, I'm happy to be here. If I just have to do his voice, that's not a problem at all. Gee whiz, I thought we actually had to have the old boy on microphone.
Yes,
Goodness
George.
sake. Oh, my.
Nobody knows
Yeah.
it's radio. Nobody knows what is real and what isn't. What is reality?
And David,
We're
you're turning 84 in 4 days. So happy birthday, everyone. It's David's birthday soon. So I wonder, one of the questions I was asked to ask you guys was, are there puns that you don't think people got? It took me 30 years to understand Dinner at 8 because I didn't know it was a movie because I was 12. Why would I know the movie Dinner at 8? But the Catherwood says tea, madam, and Nick Dangerous says far out, Catherwood. Roll a couple of bombers and leave them by the side table.
That's right.
One of my favorites is there was something fishy about the butler, probably a Pisces working for scale. Wait, I have to say another one. My mother played bridge.
You know,
Go play bridge, and I'd say, "Isn't that bridge built yet?" And to this day,
now that's a line that isn't this bridge built yet? That line will never die. Everybody uses that line. That's famous. Now, Peter could not leave a word alone. As the longtime typist for the Firesign Theatre, are we done with this now? Wait. Peter would twist it, and he would twist it again, and then Austin would, and then Proctor, and then I say, look, guys, no. Let's get back to where we were. We start there, and then Peter would twist it. It was really, he could not leave language alone. It was one of his great writing talents, that it would never just sit there on a page. He worked it. And the same thing with Proctor, only Proctor waited until we were in the studio. And then I don't mean to make you laugh. I mean, it's serious. Then we would rework it because we were creating the characters that were going to appear on the albums. Writing these characters is one thing, playing them is another. And so Proctor would be right there. Let me shine this up. Let me make it a little better. Let me put, as we all did, but it was particularly Phil's job to do that, as it was Austin's to use his ears, sit in the studio, playback. He and Peter also had incredible ears. They could hear, oh, Peter heard it, and we'd have to go back and fix it because Peter had heard it. A little bump, a little something.
Well, S.J. Perlman, who wrote a fair amount for the Marx Brothers and wrote hundreds of short comedy things for the New Yorker, also went to Yale. And I read several of S.J. Perlman's books, as he was a wonderful wordsmith. So you're talking about Peter that way reminds me of the writing skills of S.J. Perlman. Where there are lots of questions over there, but while I still have you before we open up before the deluge. I'd love it if you would talk, because we're putting this on YouTube. So for the record, so again, I'll go to David because you're doing fine.
For the record. For the record.
And this one, and the other bunch I have in LA.
The first one, yes.
So just 1 second while I look. Oh, could you please, David, if you were connected with Peter Bergman back then, he invented the term love-in. Could you talk briefly about the love-in in Los Angeles at Elysian Field in 1967? And he was the guy who invented love-in.
Yes, he issued, when we were just doing Radio Free Oz, he was doing it, but we were all working on the show at one time or another. He offered a love-in kit, $1, you got a poem, you got a bumper sticker, and you got an Oz button. And that was the love-in kit. And so he decided, and we joined immediately with him, to present a love-in, to do a love-in, with presumably his audience from KPFK. There'd be a few hundred people there, and we'd do this in Elysian Park. And all of us did promos for it. All of the Firesign did various promos. Oh yeah, it's going to be there, Elysian Park, Sunday, Easter Sunday, listen to us. well, what, 17,000 people showed up or something like that. It was huge. It was huge. And on that same day, Peter had made a contract with KRLA, 100,000 watts, border to border, and Radio Free Oz went on the air on that Easter Sunday day with Peter, and then he left. And the Phils and I did the program all summer. Phil Proctor, who I'm looking at and enjoying looking at, Phil, covered the Monterey Pop Festival.
That's right.
Live for us on the air while we were doing his summertime
That's
show.
right. No, that was a very, very heady time. By the way, if anybody is interested in my part of this story, this is my book, my book up to now. Where's My Fortune Cookie? And this relates to the Chinese gangland shooting that Bergman and I were involved in. But the book is full of pictures that illustrate a lot of things that David's talking about, and the Firesign history from my perspective. David also wrote a book recently. He's a very prolific author, and a lot of his stuff is available at Bear Manor Media. Our stuff is available at firesidetheatre.com. But he wrote another history of a time that we worked together on an album called Fighting Clowns. Okay, and David's book is called The Fighting Clowns of Hollywood. One of the things that I always admired about David, and do even more now, is that he is a chronicler. He kept notes. He kept almost a diary about what was happening, which I wish I'd done, because it's all a jumble in my head. And he still is the person I go to if I have any questions about, was I there?
Right.
Who can remember?
Right. Well, there is. I have in my hand another book which you can't see, but go to Bear Manor Books. There's one of the essential books on the Firesign Theatre and its relationship to the whole history of theater is Anything You Want To. The first half of that book is our take on Shakespeare, which we carefully honed over a period of 30 years.
Right.
It is mostly footnotes, I'm happy to say, by a group of highly qualified, I think Yale-trained scholars who have annotated this lost Shakespearean comedy. But the second half of the book is really a history of the Firesign Theatre through the life of theater. What I think it has always been important and has been to all of us, where we came from.
Right.
Our occupying the space of art we did was very short, because it only existed for a while. And if you look back at what we call the golden age, hey, I was born before it. It's really so. The time we lived through and the time we drew our art and craft from was incredibly rich, going Fibber McGee and Molly to Allen Ginsberg. I mean, we had the entire 60s that we had among us to be able to play with and chronicle. And to me, the most important aspect of and starting with Electrician, which you just heard, that's a chronicle of that time. That is America stolen from the Native Americans. That is this incredibly stupid acid head culture that was going on, that we parodied in other ways. And finally, our prediction of the future. What was it going to be? Well, there's still a war in Nigeria. Well, let's bomb them out with copies of Naked Lunch.
That's
right. The band, all the banned books. Let's just drop all the banned books on them. I mean, there are so many levels to that story that I wrote once in my notes. Somebody wanted me to write notes, so I said if there had only been that one album, it would have been the perfect 60s album. It tells the story. And you add that to another 40 years of working, always trying to tell a story, always working out of the news, always working off the television news, parodying the new, hi, I'm the long sideburn announcer now. Oh, I'm the cute girl announcer, parodying all these insane changes. And remember, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, we were an LA act. the love-in was LA all the way. It wasn't BN, it wasn't Fringy Jackets, it wasn't, it wasn't that precious San Francisco stuff. It was LA, and we were making it because before us, LA was like Iowa City. I mean, when I moved there in 1960, there was nothing there, nothing. Hollywood and Vine, I was. But
It's
we
true.
made it. I think
It's true.
we were
And
part of it.
I came in like a stranger from a strange land because I was raised in Goshen, Indiana, and Manhattan, and to me, the culture in Los Angeles when I came out with that show was crazily. It was out of control. It didn't have any sense of maturity to it. It was, the news people were ranting against the hippies in one person's opinion. They were free to politicize. But I want to mention one other thing. David touched upon the predictability of our work. I mean, how we predicted things, that we all were basically futurists in our thinking. And on that very first album, on the long side, the story of Waiting for the Electrician or Someone Like Him, there is a quiz show called Beat the Reaper. And in that quiz show, Phil Austin, who is the contestant, is injected with a mystery disease, and he has 30 seconds to identify it so their topless nurse, Judy, can come and give him an antidote injection. And the last disease that he gets, he goes farther than anybody's ever gone before on the show, and he can't figure out the last disease. Turns out to be the plague. And as he's escaping from the studio, people are running up and touching him or say, touch me. They want to catch his celebrity, if you will, and his really big disease. Now, go figure.
Members of the Black Cross and the Armenian Medical Association, let us not forget.
Yeah, that it's amazing how that one came around, and that practically was at the beginning of March. People started posting "Beat the Reaper" on my Facebook line. So
soon we'll get to the audience, which is being currently
anytime
and drugged. But so many questions. What I'd like to know, as a fan for decades, I can understand why some of the jokes are really hidden. Like if I said to someone recently, the Uncle Sigmund's Peruvian cocoa powder, and they go, milk, sugar? And you had to know a lot to know that Coke was being cut with milk sugar, with lactose.
Very good.
I was young, but I read a lot at 14. But, if you weren't in this, and I was 14, that wasn't my goddamn culture, but, I was in LA, if you don't get the milk, sugar reference to cocaine and the cutting, if you haven't read about that or something, it is missed. So there are an infinite number of jokes that are missed. So could you please talk about, are there some you think that no one has ever uncovered? And why, when I saw you at your 25th reunion farewell thing in LA, why is, oh my God, more sugar or, shoes for industry? It's not funny. Why is it funny? Because it's not, I'm sorry to say, to me.
Well, as David said, we were commenting on the culture. We're commenting on the culture around us, and more sugar represents the fact that there's sugar in everything. Okay, and sugar has an effect on people. It's a drug, really.
If you'll remember, it's Peter as a woman who screams more sugar. That's the first time it's said, and we use it over and over. You're right. It's a cultural criticism.
Thank you.
It really is a cultural commentary. In any case.
Find out. Thank you.
But in terms of like hearing it and not getting something or getting something, I found that if I listen to our albums with other people you know, not necessarily in show business even, I would sometimes hear things that I didn't realize we had put into the mix, because we call ourselves the 4 or 5 crazy guys, because when we worked together in our writing and our improvisation, all of that, it was like, you know, witches around a cauldron. And Peter would throw in an eye of newt, and David would throw in, you know, a metaphor. Anyway, the final work did not represent individual egos. It was a combination of all of our minds, our comic minds.
Thank you for answering that question of who was the 5th crazy guy. So Kathy, if you would like, we can take some questions from the audience. And let me again say, David and Phil, thank you for being here. I want to thank Michael Benner for connecting with Shadow Stevens. Our friend Roger Steffens is in the veranda porch waiting.
Yep.
Just thank you,
Roger.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Kathy and Sam, and Tufts Osher Lifelong Learning Institute here in Boston. Take it away, Kathy. Let's see what we get in. Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you, Robert.
Okay, let's see
And
what
anyone
happens
that
next.
has a question, feel free to put it in the question and answer. You know, we have lots of comments here. One question, you use so many cultural references that I missed then and today. What should we take from these obscurities?
Well,
what do you think, David? You answer.
well, yeah, right. Well, I would say that the depth of the work, which was just being talked about, is full of mixed cultural references that go back probably to the turn of the 20th century. We mined everything that came before us. Vaudeville. I mean, at one point we were a vaudeville act. Now vaudeville went out in whenever it was, like 1929, right?
Yeah,
Except
right.
we were the last vaudeville act at a theater in Tahunga, California, behind God's back, because next week at the vaudeville show, we were being replaced by a chimp act. Yes. Chimpanzees.
Yeah,
Marquis chimps.
That was
Yeah,
insane. It was
so-
we changed in a barber shop down the street, and we played in a movie theater. And this guy did, you know, variety shows, and it said the Firesign Theatre next week, the Marquis chimps. You're absolutely right, Dave. That was
so the answer is that history is all out there. Practically all I read is history, and I read a great deal about places and things I even know about already. Los Angeles, World's Fairs, you know, culture in general. It's always been something that I've been deeply invested in. And I think the George Tirebiter character lives his life through the history of American culture. He was born in 1920. He was making movies when he was in his early 20s, like Orson Welles. He was a success on radio through George. And the book called The Ronald Reagan Murder Case is all about that. Another pitch in for all our work. But George exemplifies somebody who has lived the life of an entertainer throughout the 20th century. And we grew right out of that culture as much as we were the new. We grew right out of the old.
That's right. And also, David, George Tirebiter was the lead character in Don't Crush That Dwarf, Hand Me the Pliers, because he was watching his old movies on television, and you know, and kind of dozing off and going into the television world.
And not enough in his fridge.
And what?
Any other
Not in
questions?
his fridge, just an old jar of mescaline.
Yeah, that's right. In the refrigerator, right?
Well, you know, at that point, George was in his real life. George was in his 50s. He'd been pretty much retired, and his wife, Lily, blacklisted him. She blacklisted him put him on a terrible list of, you know, communist sympathizers just so she could get a job at Metro in some
Lily Lamont,
awful movie.
right.
Lily Lamont. Oh, what a terrible woman she was. And so they separated, and he then moved into this little house, which is where he was watching himself late on television. Actually, he then got it together and moved to Glendale, I think, and ran for the city council. And by the time that 1976 rolled around, he ran for vice president. Had quite a year running for vice president.
Yeah, with George Papoon. What David is really expressing is we all created these alter egos for ourselves. I was a character named Hunter, I think. We had different characters.
That was one of them, yeah.
Right, but like in the Nick Danger record, we all were playing the actors playing the parts. Okay, and we had a whole back history of who these people were, and the reason why I had to do Nancy's voice, and eventually on the record everybody did Nancy's voice, was because she was drunk. The actress was drunk, and she didn't show up for the show. And we had to cover for it. Those are the kind of things that were going on in our minds as we approach this work, right? It was so much fun.
Right, exactly, yeah.
You know?
We have a question here. It says, any fans that have shared how much they loved you and were influenced by you that have gone on to do big things? Do you know of any fans?
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, a lot.
Steve Carell, many. Phil Hartman, who did the album cover art for Fighting Clowns of Hollywood. But Roger Steffens is also watching us today. He sent me a little note saying he was going to be watching the show. Roger Steffens is the world's greatest authority on reggae music, okay? And he told me a story that when he was in Nam, a shipment of children's records came in. I think he was doing some radio there. And among the children's records was the Firesign Theatre. And he said it saved his life, you know, because it was a connection to his amazing mind and also to the culture from the perspective of a liberated, surreal view of things. Right,
so Roger, is that the first time you heard of them, that you heard them, Roger? Okay, yeah.
That was the first time, wasn't it?
Wow, cool.
That was Electrician. That was Electrician, which was issued, which was sent along with all the other Columbia records to the PXs in Vietnam.
There you go. That's right.
We just went out with the you know, whoever else was on that March 1968 shipment.
Yeah.
Questions and
Bozo the Clown. Bozo the Clown probably was, right?
We do have another one. We have any particular music you listen to that spurred creativity or humor, and any that squashed it?
At the time, the Beatles were the major influence to us. We used to go to Peter's living room and put on the latest Beatles album, and there are all kinds of homages and references to the Beatles, especially in Nick Danger.
Well, the White Album. The White Album was playing. Everyone knew her as Nancy, as the classic one. It's a direct lift from the White Album. Yeah.
Rocky Rococo came from Rocky Raccoon, and David was a Cuckoo Cuckoo reference. But the Beatles, you see, they created the long form musical record. I mean, story record, musical story record. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. That's a story, you know, and that inspiration. It was like, yeah, well, we're doing the same thing. That's really cool, you know. We're on to something, if you will. And I know Python knew of us. I don't know how much we influenced them, but you know, the sense of absurdity and surrealism. Anybody who embraced that was influenced by Firesign Theatre. I've worked with a lot of stars and famous people in my career. I know, for instance, that Jonathan Winters was a great fan of the Firesign Theatres. And I could name all kinds of contemporary comics who knew of us and were influenced by us because we were a cultural part of the culture that they grew up in, the comic culture.
David, have any of the people from Firesign spent any time with the people from Monty Python?
Oh, well, I haven't. I was gonna answer the first. I'm less traveled. I'm less traveled. Go ahead, Phil.
Okay, yeah, I have met Eric Idle, and I replaced John Cleese in a show about Don Quixote with the LA Guitar Quartet. Never met the great funny man, but Eric Idle, yes, I've had lunch with Eric Idle, and we chatted about the observation of culture and the parody of culture, which has always been a part of the English humor from the very beginning. You know, the court jester. Okay, I mean, I was influenced by Bob and Ray in America, Beyond the Fringe from England, right, and Ernie Kovacs on television. Those were the people I was influenced by, and a lot of the music that I heard, I know songs that Ernie Kovacs did, you know, on his television show with Eddie Hatrack and Edie Adams. I mean, music has always been a part of my life. My whole family harmonized and everything. I play the violin. I can always sing. I can always harmonize. Phil Austin's a wonderful musician as well. And David and Peter were good sports. And all had enough talent to come along with us. And when we did that album, Fighting Clowns, well, a lot of the music on all of our albums was written by either me or Phil, really, and Coralie directed and everything. Porgy, tire biter, and I don't know. We had a playground, and we could play with whatever we wanted to. It's the reason why I gave up really an acting and film career and all of that, because I could do whatever I wanted. I could use whatever talents God gave me in the Firesign Theatre. And I worked with guys I absolutely loved and who were not only my peers, but they were often mentors. You know, they'd come up with stuff I would have never thought about. And it was very inspirational. It was a great kind of comic competition, right? That's how I feel about it.
Great.
David, any comments on that?
Well, I can say about music that I think I really learned to write from listening to Gilbert and Sullivan. Because the first thing I ever wrote was an imitation Gilbert and Sullivan operetta called, I can't remember what it was called because I was about 12 when I wrote it. But and Noel Coward, the album Noel and Gertie, Noel Coward and Gertrude Lawrence playing scenes from private lives. There's no funnier performance or writing than that particular album has on it. So once again, it's English. I go back to my English roots of humor.
Yeah, I also did Gilbert and Sullivan at Alan Stevenson School in New York. I was a boy soprano, so I played the female leads. I was in Iolanthe and the Pirates of Penzance. So you're right, David.
Yeah.
That had a tremendous influence on, because they're funny. Gilbert and Sullivan are really funny, and they were parodists. So I think
Exactly.
they also a tremendous influence on my comedic path.
Jaime.
Next question.
Okay, we have another one here. There have been times when the Firesign Theatre seemed to be on hiatus. What brought you back together? Certain topics, humor bubbling along and finally boiling over?
Boiling over. I like to. I think the truth of the Firesign Theatre is that we only existed when we wrote. If there was an opportunity for us to write, we were together and we were there writing. So in the hiatuses that was the first one that came after we no longer had a Columbia Records contract and we were searching around for somewhere to continue our art. There was a bump there for sure. And but what's the common phrase? It's show business. You know, it has its ups and downs. And for us as a group, The 80s were very hard on us as a group. Our audience had aged. They were no longer buying albums. We tried everything. And then the two Phils and Peter as a threesome tried everything. I worked at NPR for a year in Washington, D.C., producing a massive radio program that eventually got me fired. We did incredible
That shows
amounts.
how good it was.
Yeah, that's
Fired.
well. Yeah, I have it now. I've the John Cage's performance. It was John Cage's 70th birthday. Got me fired.
Oh my God.
But I just retrieved the tape, so I'm going to put it up on Facebook or somewhere. Anyway, yes, we were all of us always very busy. Peter always had two lives. Peter did the Firesign Theatre. He did Proctor and Bergman, and he did Peter Bergman. And he did them all with equal energy and spent this equal time.
And David, he collaborated with Ted Bonnet,
Yes.
making radio commercials for movies.
And
Okay.
in fact, yeah, that was great. That was a great influence because when we were making our last albums, we put in 2 movie commercials because he knew just how to write them.
That's right. That's right. That was our Rhino years.
Yeah.
We did 4 albums, right, with Rhino, in the 80s, 90s, late 80s.
Well,
and
we
90s.
did with Rhino Records at the very beginning was very good to us, and I have to credit independent record labels are magnificent. Stand-up records, great album. I love it. They just do it because they love it. And Rhino at the very beginning, Rhino Records, they just loved what we did, and we did 3 LPs with them at the early 80s.
And David, what's the Firesign website? Or Phil, what's the Firesign website for people to?
Firesigntheater.com with either an ER or an RE, doesn't whatever floats your boat. And with Ted Bonnet, I do a podcast now called Phil and Ted's Sexy Boomer Show. Guess what audience we're going for? And you can hear it at sexyboomer.com. You'll hear an interview with David Ossman and Harry Shearer and John Goodman and Weird Al Yankovic and Penn Jillette. I mean, it's been a very heady and interesting, it is a very fun adventure because almost everybody that we talk to are either collaborators or have been collaborators or they're friends, and that's the advantage of a long life, frankly.
May I trouble you for 2 minutes because we're going on with time, although I'm happy to be here till midnight, your time zone, on the album We're All Bozos on This Bus. And if Ralph Spoilsport can be channeled, even though I'm from LA and most people are from Massachusetts, I would sure love to see you do 30 seconds of Ralph Spoilsport.
30 seconds?
Yeah.
I'll give you a taste. Hiya, friends. Ralph Spoilsport Motors, the world's largest used nude and lewd nude automobile dealership here in the city of Emphysema. Let's just take a look at this beautiful, totally used car. Sneeze for wind vents, etc., etc. That was based on my alien observation when I first came out to LA. Didn't know how to drive, which is all right because if you move the letters around in Los Angeles, it spells legs on sale. You can't walk anywhere. I didn't know how to drive. I was doing this musical comedy in Hollywood. I would walk up to my hotel and eventually my apartment and turn on the television and watch all this insanity. And this guy, Ralph Williams, was selling cars all the time. All the time, this little dwarfish, elfish man. And that's, I had to do something with that material because I was observing the Los Angeles culture, which, as you said, Robert, you can't escape it. You cannot escape it.
Yeah, Antelope Freeway, which really is an Antelope Freeway. People don't know that don't live in LA.
Yeah, that's right.
It didn't, when we wrote it in, when we wrote the Antelope Freeway in, it in fact did go nowhere. It went nowhere. It was the Antelope Freeway to nowhere. So that happens. I wanted to say one other thing since this is Christmas time, holiday time. The show that Judith, my wife, and I did last year, It's a Wonderful Life, is the entire show is now up online.
Oh, that's
to
great.
watch. It's a beautiful, beautiful show. 50 of our favorite local people in it. It's at the Whidbey Island Center for the Arts, WICA, WICA, and it's streaming all month.
So you can go to Wicca,
Wicca.com,
Wicca.com.
Wicca.org.
Go to wicca.com, WICA.com. You'll find it, and they'll tell you how to watch this. It was just a beautiful production, and it may be, of course, the last show I ever direct or write.
Yeah, because of this
No.
damn pandemic.
Yeah.
Where
I'm
we
a
are.
member of a theater company called the Antias Company, and my wife Melinda Peterson and I have been there for 14 years, 15 years. We're dark, nothing is happening, and that's family, isn't it, David? When you
It's
do
totally,
theater,
yeah.
that's family.
Yeah.
And it's really hard not to be able to create with family. That's what Firesign
Yeah.
Theatre was to all of us as well for 50 years, through suicides and divorces and ego clashes and all kinds of crazy things that would happen. But the writing did bring us together, and the family, the love that was between us, because we could make one another laugh, and that was so important to our mental health, I think.
So we're on past an hour, but if I may, and I know that many people watching would be glad to hear you go all night. I don't know if Kathy has it in her. David, could you please give a brief summary about We're All Bozos on This Bus?
May I start with that?
Yes, please let Phil start there.
I'm going to start because David and I were very, very lucky to be cast as voices for It's a Bug's Life, okay? For A Bug's Life at Pixar. And I might not be entirely right about this, and David will correct me, but my recollection is that when we went to the cast and crew screening, I met Steve Jobs, who had just kind of bought into Pixar to help them with their computer animation ideas. And when I met him, he said, "I'm a big fan of yours." I went, "Well, that's great, Steve." And then when Taylor Jessen, our archivist, was going through stuff for the Library of Congress, he came across a contact sheet, a black and white contact sheet of the Firesign Theatre signing records at a record store in Berkeley, or Berserkly, as we always called it. And there was this tall, thin, long-haired, dark fellow with a goatee and dressed in dark clothes with his arms around us. It was Steve Jobs. Okay. And one of the things that I loved was that for years, although it's not working anymore, you used to be able to ask Siri and say, "This is Worker speaking. Hello." And she would say, "Hello, Aklam. What service can I perform for you? LOL." Or if you ask her, this still works. "Why does the porridge bird lay his egg in the air?" She will say, "You can't shut me down that easily." That's because Steve Jobs was inspired by our album, I Think We're All Bozos on This Bus, which was a predictive album about what was going to happen, how important computers were going to be in our life. And I played this character, Clem, who was in the story, a disenfranchised, where I'd been fired. And so I hacked into the doctor memory, the direct readout memory, the mainframe computer that was operating this illusion, this theme park to tell everybody how great the government was. And I planted a virus in it. I hacked into the computer. I planted a virus. We didn't use those words, but that's what we were doing. And Steve Jobs, again, just got it. He got it completely. And that's the reason why he did the homage to us.
It started with a very simple program, which people know I believe is the ELIZA program, which is a psychological program that says, "Why do you feel the way you feel?" And you answer, "Oh, it answers you. It's stupid questions." So Phil rescued a whole half mile of computer printout of this stuff and literally brought it into a meeting. We were going to do, the focus of that album was the medium of that album we decided was going to be Disneyland. We were going to do something like Disneyland.
I love the album.
And that was the beginning. And once we had the fact that Disneyland was created by this computer and that we could go there, and and so forth. On the album, the real story of Clem is not fully told, and we have worked at actually on stage.
Right.
Our last years on stage, we did some stand-up together, the four of us, and at that time we got to do a little rewriting, and so we wrote Phil back into the album and kind of explained what his story was, his backstory, which wasn't really there when we put the album together.
David said stand-up. It wasn't really stand-up, David. We actually we did shows. We did a big show. That particular show that featured Bozos. We had that pyramid set. Remember?
Oh yes, yeah.
And
Yeah.
special effects and music and lights and smoke, and we put on some pretty big shows. In the latter part of our lives, we played primarily the West Coast, or the best coast, as I think of it, and we did what is more like stand-up. We went back to our roots. We had scripts in our hands, and we stood in front of microphones and created the magic in front of the audience's eyes and ears, and it was easier on us.
That was in the last 3 years or so, 2009, 10, 11, and then we lost Peter, so we didn't do that. Phil's right. The great show we did with that set and those costumes. I remember I hurt myself falling off that set too, when the machine falls apart. But we did that at the pier in Seattle. It was one of the great gigs. There's a railroad train. There's a ferry boat. There's enormous traffic roaring by all the time. And we had this agreement that when the ferry boat came in and hooted when it landed, we would all stop wherever we were and salute.
I forgot that. That's right.
One of the biggest laughs we ever got was just doing that, waiting till the boat got in. That was a big show. Lots of costumes, lots of properties. That was, we were theater. What can I say?
In wrapping, and I'll let Kathy find one more question, but let me say for the historical record on this, since I grew up in LA, that and because the Bozos album is based on people going to Disneyland / the World's Fair, Kittyland, which used to be where the Beverly Center is. There used to be Kittyland and a pony ride.
Pony ride.
Walt Disney, and I used to go there as a kid. Walt Disney went there and liked the idea of this, half a city block of amusement rides for little kids. And that is how he got / stole or took the idea for Disneyland and, bought a gazillion acres in Orange County.
Wow. One other little a Disney story, since David and I both worked on that lot, I did a lot of stuff in what's called Studio B, a lot of animation features and things like that. And the buildings there, those wonderful old Art Deco buildings that make up the Disney studios, have double doors in the corridors, open like this, because there was a hospital nearby. And Walt figured out that if his company failed, he could always sell the buildings to the hospital because they could push the gurneys through those doors. You see,
I never heard that one, Phil. That's a good one. It's a good one.
So, Kathy, you have a juicy question.
One last question, then we can wrap it up. What was the hardest you ever laughed when one of you first shared your new material at the writing table?
Ooh, hardest we ever laughed.
Hardest we ever laughed. We laughed so much.
Yeah, it was a big laugh. All really laughed at that. That's a tough one. I'm sorry. We did laugh all the time. That was the idea. And if we weren't laughing, we were grumpy and unhappy and go ahead and drink and it was done for the day,
Yeah, or we smoke up a little bit. We sat around a table. Phil and I used to make houses and things and out of paper. We didn't make it out of paper. We bought these castles and things that you cut out and build. You'll see them all in one of our films, the Martian Space Party, Steve Gilmore directed. Some of the miniature the miniature sequences on Monster Island show some of the things that we built, and we would smoke, and we have El Presidente brandy, and we'd smoke a little dope, to get the old car started, but we did not do that when we were performing. You can't do it. Throws your timing off. We could do it when we were mixing a record because we were concentrating, and a little dope would sometimes help you narrow focus, a little tunnel vision. But that was one of the things we were always having a jolly time together. And yes, a lot of stuff that made us laugh a lot went right into the writing and ultimately was shared with the world through our records.
Excellent.
Thank you, David Ossman. Thank you, Phil Proctor. Thank you,
Robert.
the memory of Peter
Thank you,
Bartman,
thank you.
and thanks to the memory of Phil Austin. December 2nd, 2020, for posterity. Thank you so much, you guys, for being here and all the wisdom and jokes that live on in perpetuity. Thank you.
Well, peace, and let's hope for a better world in the years to come.
January 20th.
You bet.
2021,
If they
can't
make it.
wait.
Right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All
so
right.
much.
Yep.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.